All in favor by the sign of aye. Opposed is nay. Motion carries. Madam Clerk, let's read resolutions. 7A, please.
A resolution authorizing the administrator for the Department of Economic and Community Development to award home program funds to Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise Incorporated for the development of 24 newly constructed rental units at 2105 Bailey Avenue, which 5 units will be reserved as affordable for low to moderate income households in the amount of $200,000.
Let's move on to 7B.
A resolution authorizing the city treasurer to renew the contract with SunTrust Bank for commercial and general banking services, including purchasing cards and safekeeping and custodial accounts, and for the first of 2 optional 1-year renewals.
7C.
A resolution authorizing the city treasurer to renew the contract with First Tennessee Bank for commercial and general banking services, including lockbox services, payroll cards, safekeeping, and custodial accounts, and for the collection of sewer payments, property taxes, and water quality fees at branch locations for the first of 2 optional 1-year renewals.
7D.
A resolution to amend resolution number 29865 for the purpose of maintaining the CopLink software platform and complementary data integration services with Forensic Logic to be active from January 1st, 2019 through December 31st, 2019 for an increase in the annual contract spend limit from $39,307 to $50,000.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. That concludes this part of the agenda session. There is no departmental report today, so now I would turn the chair over to Public Works and Transportation Chair Jerry Mitchell. Thank you.
Can I get approval of minutes? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Thank you. We have no ordinances or resolutions for the next 2 weeks from the Department of Transportation, but we do have a few from Public Works. Mr. Holland, hey, there you are. Anything to say before we launch into these resolutions?
Oh, welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's kind of you to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to start with Public Works resolutions this week. Would you please read 7E?
A resolution authorizing the award of contract, no, I'm sorry. A resolution authorizing the award of contract number Y1500822 to Complete Demolition Services LLC of Carrollton, Georgia, Avondale Youth and Family Development Center building abatement and demolition in the amount of $103,247.55 plus a contingency amount of $10,000 for a total amount of $113,247.55.
Everything okay, Councilman? All right, then, not seeing no lights, we'll move on to 7F, please.
A resolution authorizing the award of contract number Y19010-201 to JDH Company Incorporated of Chattanooga, Tennessee, replacement roofing system for Glenwood YFD Center in the amount of $150,445 plus a contingency amount of $15,000 for a total amount of $165,445.
Are you okay, Councilperson Coonrod? All right, thank you. Let's move to 7G, please.
A resolution to amend resolution number 29935 to authorize the administrator for the Department of Public Works to renew contract number S16011 on-call landscape architect design services for year 3 of 3 with ASA Engineering and Consulting Incorporated, Barge Design Solutions, Craig Design Group, Sandtech, and WM Whitaker and Associates for 1-year blanket contracts with 5 professional firms for use by all departments for an estimated total amount of $500,000.
I see no lights, but can you give us an example of what one of these contracts would be with the landscape architect design services?
Sure, we've used this this service for anything from a small facility improvement to some of our green infrastructure projects. Also at most of our facilities.
Are you using these, will you be using these services at the new Avondale Youth and Family Development Center?
I don't believe we have this as an on-call prompted for that project, no, sir.
No? Okay.
But many of our other projects, we use this on-call service to ensure we've done everything within our own regulations to make the site appropriate for green infrastructure or runoff.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, we're going to move to next week. Please read 7D.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to apply for acceptance into the Brownfield Voluntary Program for the old Lupton City Mill site, and if approved, to execute the Brownfield Voluntary Agreement in substantially the form attached with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation as outlined in the agreement.
Well, I see no lights, but you have one? Councilman Smith.
I mean, it's a simple request, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Justin, just a little information about what exactly this is. I mean, obviously, we're becoming a part of a volunteer organization, and it sounded like it's to ensure that we're not obligating ourselves to doing the cleanup, since we had nothing to do with itself. But
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So essentially what this does, it protects the city from liability for future contamination issues that are discovered on the site. It's particularly helpful considering that we didn't really have any part in the placement of any of the chemicals or contaminants on this particular site. So that Brownfield Voluntary Agreement is just that. It's a voluntary agreement of the city to enter into with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. This is part of, it was part of the whole scope of the project. This voluntary agreement did not have to be signed prior to beginning the construction or demo at the site. It just had to be signed. It is approved by TDEC, and all of this is ready in a draft form to be executed. The particulars to how that's happened, or how that happens, if you'd like, I could ask Bill Payne to come up and explain in detail how the...
is that a threat?
Sir?
Yeah.
What's that?
Are you threatening me not to ask questions because Bill Payne's going to come and give me detail?
That is, if you want to know...
That sounded awfully threatening.
If you want to know, we do know, and we can explain that in greater detail about how that all the mechanics behind that. But we do have a plan that is in place with TDEC.
Okay. Now, that's good enough. I was just curious the degree at which TDEC's involvement is to ensure that we wouldn't be responsible or liable in the future.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And we'd be happy to answer anything offline as well.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. 7E, please.
A resolution authorizing the award of contract number Y19014201 to JDH Company Incorporated of Chattanooga, Tennessee, replacement roofing system for Warner Park UTC softball field house in the amount of $45,800 plus a contingency amount of $5,000 for a total amount of $50,800.
Okay, all right. Seeing no lights, that'll do it for Public Works and Transportation, and we will now adjourn and move into Planning and Zoning with Chairman Ledford. Thank you, Justin.
Keep moving. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Planning and Zoning. Can I get approval for the minute? Thank you very much. All in favor say aye. All right, minutes are approved. Afternoon, Mr. Bridger.
Good afternoon.
We've got a super long agenda this afternoon. If we'll jump right into it. 6A.
This is a request to rezone a piece of properties in the Hill City community from R1 residential to ERD2 to accommodate basically a rear apartment garage for a particular parcel. That's the request. You can see it highlighted in yellow. I think this thing to cooperate. There we go. You see that in the land use, it's predominantly single-family residential in the area. This is a smaller residential lot. You can see the site in the upper left-hand corner and the lower left-hand corner. You can kind of see the views across from this property. Zoning, you can see it's got ERD2 across the street. You got R1 surrounding it on the north, the south, and the west. Just from zoning history, you know, that property that's ERD2, you see to the right there was rezoned in 2018. So that's basically the, you know, as far as the closest approximate zone to this location that's been rezoned. Just as a reminder, the differences in the two zones, R1 has a little bit larger lot size, a little bit larger lot frontage. I think the main thing is R1 does not allow you to do accessory dwelling units, whereas the ERD2 does allow you to do those, subject to certain standards. As you can see, you can only have one accessory dwelling unit per lot. There are limits on the maximum amount of habitable square feet. And it does count towards your overall unit count for a particular location. Just as a reminder about how we look at extensions of form-based code, there are basically two ways. Either you abut the property, or if you do not abut it under B, then there's three criteria you look at. You know, is it in close proximity to the form-based code boundary? Is the physical character of that property consistent with the overall character of the context area that would be in? And then is it within the downtown plan? And so this property does check those boxes for non-abutting properties, because it is, you know, it's in close proximity, it's just across the street. This lot size is similar to other lots, you know, within the form-based code district, and it's in the downtown plan. The plan recommends urban single-family residential for this location. So again, thinking about small lots, single-family residential is a recommendation in terms of the use. The plan does also encourage a greater mix of residential uses and housing options. So based on looking at all those factors, staff found that the request was compatible with the plan and the surrounding land uses and is an appropriate extension. So we recommended approval. At Planning Commission, there was no opposition. Planning Commission concurred with staff's recommendation to approve.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bridger. I do have one light, and now I have two. Dr. Burrs?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. John,
Yes, ma'am.
talk to me about, this is an allowable ADU in
Yes.
form-based code only?
That is correct.
Okay, so you can have ADUs in form-based code areas?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. One more follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. So what's the route you would go outside of form-based code? There is none. Is
That's
that-
right. Currently, there is really no, unless you are in a multifamily type zone. So if you're in an R3, I would imagine you could do it, but you could not do it in any other R1 type zone. You could not do it.
Okay, thank you.
John, real quick before I go to Councilman Henderson, if you attach with a breezeway, though, is that?
I think I'm going to let Dallas answer that. I know there's been some modifications to how did you want to speak to that as far as if you?
If you attach it as described in the zoning ordinance, it just becomes part of the house. It's not an accessory dwelling unit. It's just part of the house.
It's part of the house, but that is allowable in R1.
Zoning allows it to be connected.
Correct. It's just not defined as an ADU.
They have to meet all the setbacks like a primary structure.
Gotcha. Thank you. Just want to make sure.
Okay.
Councilman Henderson.
John, was there any, I know there was no public opposition. Have you received any email? from
Not
the
aware of any. I'll double check with Brian again. But we have not
Okay.
received any.
The other thing, if we approve this, what is, other than the ADU, let's say they tore down the house,
Sure.
what could be different about this zoning as opposed to R1?
You still limited to saying use. It's one single-family residence with, that with an ADU. That's all you can do. Now, like R1, you have churches and that kind of stuff, which would be similar in an RD zone. But in terms of commercial or multi-unit residential, you could not do that in an RD.
So the setbacks would be a little different.
Yep. That's what, yeah. It's a
But
little
other
bit-
than that, so if they tore it down, basically you just build a single-family detached. You
That's
can have
correct.
an ADU, okay. Two-story is,
Yeah, the height, I won't say it's very similar, it's 35 feet.
Is there
I wanna
anything
say.
in the height that would be different than just R1 dwelling?
Not that I'm aware, but I'll double check.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Very good. Good, Councilman? Good questions. John, I see no further lights on that. If you'll get back with Councilman Henderson on that height,
I will
that would be,
do.
I would like to know too, if you don't mind.
I will find out.
We'll move on to 6B.
Make a note real quick. You know, I just think I just answered my question. The RD2 means 2 stories. But I'll find out what that means in terms of number of feet. R1, you can do 35 feet before you have to start, so it's essentially a 2-story structure. But I'll give it to you in feet terms, so you've got a more apples-to-apples comparison. The next request is to rezone, this is in the Gun Barrel Road, Hamilton Place area, from O1 to C2 to accommodate a retail development. It's located near the Igo Gap, Gun Barrel Road intersection. I'm going to speed through this, 'cause I think this is pretty clear, unless Councilman Lever, you need a detailed presentation, but essentially it's surrounded by commercial zoning. The Hamilton Place plan recommends commercial. So staff found it was compatible with the plan. The form of the area's got some retail business around it. The extension of the zones we recommended approved. There was no opposition. Both PC and staff recommend approval.
Very good. I see no lights on this one. This is in my district. I'm very familiar with this project. It's basically a revitalization of that corner and the
Right.
next door property. It seems like a pretty good project in revitalizing that whole section of that corner of Gun Barrel and Igo. So I have no further questions.
Okay.
6C.
Yeah, this one's a little more complex. This is in Highland Park. This is, if you're familiar with the National Cemetery, this is right across the street. What they used to call the Lucy Boiler site. There's some news articles about it. I'm sure you saw in the Times Free Press. But what they're asking for is a rezone a property. It's currently zoned M1 and M2 and R1 to UGC for a mixed-use development. Again, here's a close-in on the site. I think it's important to note that parts of the property front directly onto Holtzclaw, but there are also some portions of this property that have in front access onto Greenwood Avenue. You see that kind of that line running kind of to the right side of the image there, Greenwood Avenue. So that is a residential street. So what I would caution you all as we think about the zoning for this, making sure that we provide for adequate transition between what's happening on the Lucy Buller site that fronts Holtzclaw and then the residential homes that front Greenwood Avenue. So here are some pictures again. On the top, you see looking into the site itself, and then on the bottom, particularly the bottom left, you see Greenwood Avenue. That gives you an idea of kind of what's going on there in terms of the development pattern. I think another important thing to note is there is some topo here, believe it or not. There's a pretty good bluff, about a 30-foot bluff actually, on a portion of the site with a pretty steep drop from the properties from Greenwood Avenue to the Lucy Buller site itself. So that's something to think about, and that's something actually the applicant mentioned in response to the initial staff recommendation. The applicant noted they need to put the property, whatever they build on Greenwood Avenue, closer to the street because of that, that cliff or that drop-off you got on the rear of their property. Again, here's a zoning map showing the zoning of the site. You see it's, that coloring is wrong. It's all M1. I'm not sure why that's showing up yellow. It should be purple. That's all M1. And looking at the plan, the 2008 Highland Park zoning study basically recommended rezoning a lot of the area, but did not include this location. We did note that there have been about 9 rezoning cases for UGC that have been approved in this area, so there is a precedent for approving UGC in this area. And within Highland Park itself, there's been 4 rezoning requests that have been approved for UGC. Just again to compare what's there now, under M1 and M2, I think you all know the uses in those can get pretty crazy and not good for a neighborhood. So we certainly want to see something other than M1 at this location right next to Highland Park. So I think definitely staff would concur that changing the zone is the right thing to do. I think we had some differences in terms of how we handle that transition to Greenwood Avenue. UGC, would allow them to do their development program, which would include a mix of apartments, offices, and retail. It also allows banks, savings and loans, hospitals, motels, and hotels. So there's some other uses that may not be appropriate at this location. And it has some design standards for how you locate buildings closer to the street to kind of create that Main Street feel for that location. So getting to staff review, we felt like definitely a portion of the request, that portion, I'm going to go ahead and jump to this. The area that you see with the red dots, we definitely concur that that would be supportive to go to UGC because it's more oriented towards Holtzclaw. What we're trying to address is how you transition from this development that fronts Holtzclaw to the properties that front onto Greenwood Avenue. You can see those remaining parcels. Let's see here if I can get my pointer to work. Here's this one. You probably can't see on your screen. But if you see the two big squares right in the middle of your screen. I wish there's a way you can see this. I'm sorry, guys. I don't have the cursor. But these little properties here are on the edge and have more of a relationship to the homes on Greenwood Avenue. So when we think about the zone, again, it's not just the project, the zone, what zone makes sense there to ensure that there's a compatible development along that street? So we recommended first approval of the M1 site and all those red dots to UGC with some conditions. You can see one, conditioning out auto-oriented uses, wholesaling, self-storage facilities, adult-oriented establishments, put a limit on height to 3 stories, and that dumpsters, we had a limit on where dumpsters were located because, again, thinking about compatibility with the houses that front along Greenwood Avenue. The second thing we recommended for those other out parcels that have more of an orientation to the neighborhood, we actually recommended RTZ. Now, the applicant submitted on their site plan showing townhouses for these. So we recommended RTZ, which is a townhouse zone, as a way to accommodate their proposal, but provide a little bit more transition from a UGC, which is a more intensive zone, to the adjacent single-family residential. And we recommended RTZ was subject to 2 conditions: single-family residential only, and vehicular access and parking shall be from the rear. Planning Commission, after hearing from the applicant, one of the things the applicant brought up as it relates to staff's recommendation for RTZ, there's a 25-foot setback from the front, which is going to keep them from pushing those townhouses closer to the street, and they needed UGC to give the flexibility in moving the buildings closer to the street. So after hearing from staff's comments and the applicant, there was no opposition. They essentially concurred with the applicant and recommended UGC with a limitation of it being for single-family detached residential only. Now, what I'll say that needs to be changed on this condition, it needs to read subject to either residential townhouses or residential only, because actually, single-family detached you cannot do in a UGC zone. So we'll just need to tweak that condition before it gets to you all for final reading next week. But their program is showing essentially townhouses for those out parcels. So any questions?
Councilman Byrd.
Are there going to be any access coming in from Holtzclaw?
As I understand, they're going to try to use, there's that, see that kind of curvilinear street, railroad right away? Not with Blythe. See where? Is that, my understanding correct, Blythe? They're talking to your staff about using this right away, this to access the property? That's my understanding.
Okay.
Okay. But that would be, as I understand, they would be using this or some vehicle thereof to get onto Holtzclaw.
Okay.
But I think that's also a good question. You certainly can ask the applicant to next week
All right.
to clarify.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilwoman Coonrod, I see your light.
Thank you, Chair. So I had the opportunity to meet with the great people that's making this investment. And actually, the road that's behind M&M, that's gonna be an access point for
I go to Ariel's.
that small in the street here, Anderson Avenue. Like, that's a small street. It's kind of look like it's an alley,
Right.
but it's accessible for traffic.
Yeah, I think that's what they're going to try to use, as I understand it, too, to access the property. Yep. Yeah, and again, we were definitely supportive of the project. We were just thinking about that transition, how it transitions to the rear, to the homes up front on Greenwood Avenue. Just being careful about that.
Very good. Any more questions? Everyone good? John, I have a couple quick ones, if I may.
Yes.
Can you go back to the map,
With the aerial or the zoning?
the rezoning map, please?
That one?
I see one parcel that it's cut around. I'm assuming, do you know if that property owner is just asked to be outside of that?
I imagine they don't own it. Yeah, I guess they didn't get permission to request. Either they don't own or didn't get permission.
Okay. And on your condition amendments to the properties along
On Greenwood Avenue?
Greenwood, you're going to go with UGC with the amendments, but are you going to add anything in height restrictions since UGC has 4 stories?
That's another one that council certainly could add, is if you limit the height not to exceed 2 or 3 stories if the council desired.
Okay. When are we going to work on this week so that we have our amendments ready to go for next Tuesday? Very good.
I'd be happy to, I can prepare some things that y'all can
Okay.
have for consideration.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate that. John, I'm seeing no other lights.
Can you make a
On
note?
Cases, you want to talk about our amendment?
Yes. Conditions. Okay. Yeah, so we have a zoning text amendment. This is to our form-based code. And like anything, as you live with the code for a while, you learn about some things that are missing, some tools in the toolbox. One of the things that we're now in the process of working through is some major sites potentially coming into form-based code. One is the Awesome site, which we've all read about in the paper. The other is the Wheel and Foundry site. And these are what I call mega sites that are very large, because of their size and scale, it's hard to determine what is the appropriate context that would apply to those sites. It's one thing, if you go back to the case we had before, where you had one parcel, right? Let me go back. Here we go. One parcel coming in. It's very clear the context that that's about. It's quite another, well, fast forward, so contrast that with, let me go ahead and move forward. Something as big as the Awesome site is 140 acres, or the Cameron Harbor site, which is 40 acres, or West Side is 120. When you have sites that big, it's not clear what context they're a part of. And so if somebody's wanting, again, we're not saying somebody has to, but if somebody wants to apply to be in the form-based code, we need a way to figure out how to determine the appropriate zones or tools that would go with that. So what this zoning text amendment does is it creates a process. All it does is create a process for sites that are 40 acres or larger to present a request to staff to say, hey, I would like to come into form-based code. This is going to be my context, and here are the zone types I'm going to use. And they're going to use the same zone options that come out of our current form-based code. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're using those same zone options. So to give you an example for the Awesome site, one thing that's unique about them is they have several industrial users. And those industrial users may not be allowed in some of the downtown contexts. So some sites are unique. Wheel and Foundry is going to be very similar. You got a Wheel and Foundry's got a lot of industrial history with it. So the idea is you would establish your context, propose some zones that would go with that, present that to staff. We would review that. We would develop the amendments to go with it. We would also have our recommendations. So just because an applicant is requesting zones A through F, whatever that is, we're still going to look at it from the context of the downtown plan and other things to say, here's what we think is appropriate. So like any other zoning case, you're going to hear what the applicant's asking, you're going to hear staff's recommendation and planning commission, and then you're going to make the final decision. So all this does is creates a process by which somebody can create their context, define the zones they want to use in it, and then move it through the process like any zoning case. That's it in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. It's pretty simple. I do see a light. Councilman Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, this process includes going through Planning Commission first before it gets to us?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I'll add to that, is there a public hearing process involved in this component?
Yes, it's part of, I mean, the norm, like any zoning case, so it'll be
Okay.
planning commission in here.
Okay, very good. John, I see no other lights on this topic. Oh, wait, I have one coming in at the last second. Councilwoman Coonrod?
Yes, ma'am.
Just want to go back to C, if you can. So
Sure.
with those conditions, so are they already in agreement to the conditions that you all are saying? Did you
Which,
wanna
I'll make sure, what you say C, I'll make sure I'm following you.
I think along
For,
Greenwood.
on Host Cloud Green?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, you're going back to the prior case. My apologies. Yeah, they were fine with what planning commission recommended as far as being UGC stipulating it to being residential only. I think what we need to do though is, they're not, as I understand, it, they're planning on doing townhouses, not single-family detached houses. So that condition wouldn't work for them anyway, for those properties. And you can't do single-family detached in UGC anyway. So I think we just need to just change that word to say residential townhomes only. And I'll also develop some language on height for your consideration as well next week. And then, of course, the applicant will be here next week to kind of make sure we're all on the same page.
Right, I think they're on the same page, because we've had several meetings with them, and to include the neighborhood of Highland Park as well, so they're on board for that.
Great.
Just want to make sure we're not adding unnecessary stipulations
Understood.
on here. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councilwoman. John,
Oh,
talk to us.
okay. Talk
Steep
about
slopes and
steep slopes and floodplains. Well, we are,
I feel like it's been a year.
it has been a long
10.
journey. We are wrapping up the draft report, and again, I want to emphasize it's a staff report, not council endorsed, so you're at arm's length from it. It's just a staff recommendation based on the request that you gave us to kind of develop the study and make some recommendations. We're meeting with our advisory committee this coming Friday to get some of their comments, and again, the advisory committee consists of both residents and builders and engineers. After we get their comments, we are planning on releasing the report on October 18th, which is a Friday. And what we'll do is we'll bring you all a hard copy, if you like, at your desk, so kind of a bound hard copy. I will say it's quite lengthy. It's about that thick. So I saved you some trouble, and we created an executive summary. So if you want to get to the crux of it, you can. The executive summary is about 10 pages. So that includes our finding. So we'll leave that at your office so you can review it. Then we're going to, we'll brief you all we'd like to come to your strategic planning meeting on October 29th?
9th, yes.
At 1:30 to kind of give you an overview of that executive summary. Then we will be also hosting, or recommend that we host at council. This is something you all need to endorse, and I'll look over our chairman, as far as having a public hearing on the first Tuesday in November at 6 o'clock.
The 5th.
Okay, the 5th, November 5th. That'll be the public hearing for the public to say, hey, we read the staff report, here's what we think. So you're going to hear everybody's thoughts. Then we would come back at the next Planning and Zoning Committee meeting the following week and say, here's our report, here's what we heard at the public. Then at that point, it's your football. And so you would kind of give us some direction. That report's going to have a number of recommendations. It's not going to get a lot of specific standards. It's talking about the kinds of changes that we're recommending, and it's quite a few. Then you need to tell us which things to build out. And then once you've told us to build out those items, we will go to work on creating those ordinances, which we would try to have ready for public review sometime in February. So that's the process.
Very good. So John, basically what's going to happen is we're going to be presented with a menu item, or a menu full of items to
That's
choose
correct.
from. We can, at that point, decide as a council which items, or all, or if not.
That's right.
At that point, which items we want to have you move forward with. That'll be the first step for us, but we will have plenty of time to review this document, and we will have the proper meetings and open meetings to get full feedback.
Mhm.
Let me see, Council, Dr. Burrs, I see your light.
Kind of a conceptual question, John.
Yes.
if you were writing the introduction, which I'm sure you all have been, to this document,
Yes.
it would say, we're creating this document because,
I think to ensure that we maintain our position as the scenic city of the South. We know we need to grow. We want to see opportunities for it, but how can we do it in a smart way that accommodates our housing needs without impacting those scenic amenities that make this community special?
so it's preemptive, right?
Yes.
The reason I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and one of the things I've been thinking about is that there have been some folks who haven't behaved correctly with this whole issue of steep slopes. And yet, the issue that keeps coming up to me is enforcement. So when they present their plans to you, you're already looking at steep slope impact. We've always looked at that. And we approve their plans.
Yep.
And then something else happens.
Right.
And we don't go back. Then it's a matter of enforcement. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, do we have some of the challenges we have now because we haven't gone back and enforced what we required them to do, or weren't monitoring it? I'm not sure the correct word. You know where I'm going
Yeah,
with
I would
this.
say that's part of it, but it's not the full story. I think certainly when it comes to construction site management, I would say, and I'm looking at Dallas, that's where, tightening enforcement up, which they're already doing now. A lot of
Sure,
that's already
yeah.
happened now. So that's certainly part of it. I think the other, though, is, I use the analogy like we have this room, right, which can accommodate X number of people. It'd be one thing if we're trying to design this room and say, okay, we can figure out how to get 50 people. It'd be another thing to say, we're going to try to squeeze 500 people in here. And so I think where zoning can help is, let's be clear about the basic parameters about how you develop a site that has sensitive resources on it. So a lot of communities, what they do is say, not saying you can't develop it, but let's try to limit the amount of grading and clearing we're doing, because it has a whole set of impacts it causes. You have to do a lot more engineering when you do that. You start then taking away from the scenic amenities of the area. You set up situations where you could have other off-site community impacts because you're doing that. Now, the flip side of that is how do we make it easier for folks to impact those slopes less? So you'll see some of the recommendations talk about, hey, let's reduce those right-of-way widths. Let's reduce the curb-to-curb widths. Let's provide incentives and bonuses for staying off of those. So I think it's kind of a both and. It's one side, certainly in the construction site management process, better due diligence, but it's also setting up some basic ground rules for how you develop on sensitive sites so that you're not overgrading, overclearing, and creating a bigger design challenge downstream to problem solve around.
So it's a lot of it's new and preemptive.
Yes.
From here on out. Because we have responsible builders that have been doing
Sure.
that all along, and we've reclaimed land by fill and this sort of thing. So I just wanted to make sure, and it's not a criticism of an enforcement. It's
Right.
that all of a sudden we find this
Yep.
thing built,
Yep.
which wasn't at all what we said they could build, and the damage is already done.
That's right.
Or clear cutting, or these kinds of
Yes.
things. So I just wanted to make sure that we weren't coming up with all kinds of rules and regulations to deal with the problems of the few that aren't behaving correctly.
Right.
And maybe punishing folks who have been behaving correctly. That's
Well, that's why we, again, we work closely with the Land Development Office, also in communication with the development community on that advisory committee.
Sure.
And there's been some ideas exchanged, but certainly I'd say there's been a lot of new ideas identified in the construction site management side about doing better quality engineering and how you do your, but again, if you look across the spectrum, here I'll give you a statistic that, again, we looked at 6 different communities in the southeast, so it didn't go to the west coast, didn't go to the north, stayed in the southeast, and identified 22 common zoning ordinance tools to, and there's don't not only include standards, but more flexibility. So it's not just about.
Sure.
Okay, we have 2. Chattanooga has 2 out of 22 common zoning standards that are used by Knoxville, Nashville, Asheville, Durham, Huntsville. And so I think, again, the idea is we all, I think, like even the folks in the builder community say, we just need predictability. If we have some basic rules that we all understand how to play by, that helps everybody do a better job. And so, clearly, we'll need to vet all that. Sure, we'll get some feedback at the advisory committee. But I would say the big picture is we have a lot of gaps in our zoning code right now. And I think that's partly contributing to what we're seeing, to some of the frustrations.
The frustrations. Well, Dallas and his office are doing a great job. It's when you come upon something where somebody didn't behave appropriately,
All right.
you know, how come?
Yep.
How did that happen? And you're saying that if we're preemptive,
Yes.
then we know from the very beginning what's expected.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Burrs. I couldn't have said it actually better myself when it comes to setting these precedences or these standards on the front end versus being reactive case-by-case basis. And I think that's where we have found ourselves, and it's not doing us very well. So, John, I know you're meeting with the committee this Friday. Again, please tell them thank you for their time and their dedication to this. This is called the Natural Resources Assessment. I think it's about time. I'm very excited that this has happened, and it's happened at this particular time. They put in a tremendous amount of work, and I really appreciate, and this whole council does, because this has been a long time coming, and I'm very glad we're bold enough to tackle this. Sure. And appreciate everybody on council's support in taking a look at this. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to John. I see no other lights, so I will go ahead and adjourn us until 4 at our council meeting today.